All right, so we're now being recorded.
Yep, we're live.
Hello, everyone. Today, Phil and I are going to talk about active listening, what it is, how to do it, all that. I wanted to start off by making sure that we lay out why we want to talk about it, like why us. And part of the reason is that we're both educators. So, for instance, I have about 7 years teaching and tutoring off and on. So that involves a lot of making sure I know where the student is at. So communication is part of the game, name of the game. We have to make sure that we communicate well.
Absolutely right, Brandon. I want to add that my name's Phil. I have been a math teacher for 22 years, and I don't know how to stop it. I don't even know how to stop teaching math at this point. And what I've noticed is when I started being an educator, I had the lamentable tendency to pontificate endlessly about math and not ask for input from the student. Listening with intention of understanding the student's needs and concerns was something that I was not born with, and I had to slowly pick that up as I gained more experience as an instructor. And I'm sure all of you, through either high school or through your college experience, have had at least one math teacher who you feel like maybe wasn't listening to you as best they could. And when they talked, maybe you got the feeling that they didn't really understand where you were coming from. And this will happen from time to time as an instructor. And Brandon and I both wanted to make sure that we were not that sort of instructor. And we want to sort of communicate the skills that we learned as instructors to all of you, because if you can listen better, there are plenty of ways in which it could help you.
That's right. We know obviously we're going to be talking about the motivations and everything soon. But it makes sense obviously as students why listening well might be to your benefit. But also it's helpful in the rest of your life.
Absolutely right. So
right.
As Brandon says, that just because, like, let me think about how to put this for a second. Like, all of us know how to listen in some sense, but we want to talk specifically about how to put more effort into your listening.
Totally agree. Let's go on to the next slide real quick. All right, so it may be easier to describe what active listening is by describing what it isn't, because I think the name can be a bit misleading. Firstly, it isn't just like hearing the words someone is saying. Obviously, there's a lot more we can do. We know that listening is more than just having words into your ears. But it also isn't just understanding those words. This is what constitutes listening, yes, but not active listening. The active part does not just mean that you are waiting to talk, to start saying something. It doesn't mean that you're preparing a speech that you're going to give after someone's done talking. Nor does the active part mean that you are spending time judging or evaluating what the other person is saying, necessarily. The active part is going to mean something different. Let's see what that might be. Before we get into details about what the active listening is really specifically, like really analytically, I'm gonna pass it over to Phil real quick and let him talk about what a scenario where active listening is present might look like. Phil, are you there?
Oh, wait, you need something, Brandon? What's going on here?
Yeah, I think this is your slide.
You'll have to excuse me, man. I was watching TikTok. Yeah, there's this really cool video of these guys like lighting dynamite and throwing it, and then like their dog thinks they're playing fetch, and he brings the dynamite over to them, and then like they tell the dog to go away, and he drops the dynamite under the car, and but don't worry, the dog's fine though.
As you can tell, I feel really listened to.
Oh, right. Wait, the presentation. Jeez, man, I'm sorry. Man, I thought, why didn't you tell me there was a presentation going on? Okay, so you see what I just did there, folks? You don't want to be that person. Little bit awkward, right? So, clearly I was not listening to Brandon. And Brandon deserves to be listened to because he's put a lot of work into this presentation. So if I was actively listening to Brandon, what you might see in real life is that I would be watching what he's doing very closely. I would be making eye contact. I would be giving confirmation as he talked that I heard him. After he's done talking, I might take a second to pause and think about what was said. And then I would give some statement paraphrasing what he just said, and I might ask relevant questions to what he just said. Now, all of us kind of have some sense, even if we can't 100% put our finger on it, whether a person is listening to it or not. It's not any one thing that's definitive. It's just we sort of intuitively know, right? Like even if we're watching a conversation between two different people, you can kind of tell if someone's just sort of waiting for their turn to talk or if someone's really processing what's being said. What we want to do here is describe how you can get better at taking your time, processing what was being said, and helping the other person communicate better in turn.
That's right. It sounds perfect. Yeah. So the if I'm getting all that right, what we're doing, what our goal here is with this, one of the biggest goals is to just listen well, and we'll be talking about that in the next slide.
Absolutely right, sir.
Let's take a look. So now we're going to get into more nitty gritty. So I'll break this definition. I want to break a definition into the goals. I want to start with that. I want to start with what we're trying to achieve through active listening. Firstly, there is what we've already mentioned. It's listening and doing it well. You're focusing on the words. You're making sure you understand them, that you're getting something out of it, that you're learning something through the active listening process. But that's not the only goal. That's what the listening part is. The active part is making sure that the speaker, the person that is actually speaking to you, feels listened to. Now, there's lots of scenarios where this benefits you and them, of course. People like to be listened to. But I wanted to establish that this is a goal of active listening. So anytime we're talking about something, anytime we're talking about doing something for the purpose of active listening, it is supporting one or both of these goals.
Right. So if I've understood what you've said correctly, it's not enough just to listen and comprehend, but we also want to communicate that what the other person is saying matters to us as well. We need to make sure that they're aware of this fact.
Right. That's right. All right. So now there's lots of scenarios where we're going to have to consider this. So let's talk about when we might need to consider active listening. What sort of scenarios this might come up. So most often, active listening applies to one-on-one or small group situations. If you're, as those are the most likely situations to have both goals in mind. For example, when you're talking with your friend, you may want to both understand what they are saying as well as ensure that they feel listened to. In other words, your misunderstanding, you're not listening, your friend not feeling listened to could do harm. So, for instance, if you are at a guest lecture at a college, there's 200 people in the auditorium, it's probably not that important that you seem like you're listening. Like, obviously, it might be a bit rude if 300 people are all on their phones in the middle of the presentation. But the goal of making sure the speaker feels listened to is a little less important than if you were, for instance, having a really difficult conversation with a family member. In those kinds of situations, the goals of active listening are even more important. And that includes any difficult conversations, both personal and possibly academic, or in your own business, things like that. There's all sorts of scenarios where difficult conversations might come up, and that you may need to employ some of the techniques we're going to talk about. Now, that's not to say that the techniques are useless if you're not in one of these cases. You get to pick and choose what things you want to do here. So focus on what your goal is. In the lecture example I gave earlier, for instance, you still probably want to learn and understand and memorize the things that the speaker is saying. So some of the techniques that aid that part of the active listening process are going to be useful to us here.
So if I understand what you've said, there, Brandon. It's much more important to actively listening in very small groups and one-on-one conversations where many things that are said might be critical to understanding the other person. But I
That's
mean,
right. Yeah.
if you if you don't understand everything we say right at this very second, that's okay because you can always watch the video later.
That's right.
And is there
Yeah,
any,
yeah. So
yeah.
you should always consider how important it is, of course, in order to gauge what sort of steps you should take when you're starting a conversation or something like that. Obviously, you should always try to put the most in when you're talking with someone. But yeah, we can always consider how important it is.
I like that.
All right. Let's take a look. So another thing I wanted to bring up is that you might be thinking, okay, I'm already doing that. Like you, and to a large extent, you probably be right. You know how to listen. You've gotten to college by listening. You understand how to learn things, and so you've learned quite a lot up to this point. So you might think like, why do I need to do all this? Aren't I already doing it? And the thing is that we're not all perfect. So you might not always be doing exactly what you need to be doing in the middle of a conversation. And I just wanted to bring up a few scenarios that may seem familiar that can disrupt active listening. So for instance, sometimes you might think you are absorbing all the information in the conversation, only to find out later that you forgot their name. It's happened to me. You might come away from a conversation thinking that the two of you are closer, only to learn that the other person thought you weren't even listening. So one way that you might be listening less actively than you might wish is by getting distracted. This can hurt both of your goals. You will probably absorb less information while distracted and could quite likely look distracted while they're talking, which isn't like a good look. No one likes to feel like they're not listened to. With all the modes of distraction in modern society, it's basically impossible to not be distracted occasionally. This problem is worse than it's ever been and will likely only get worse. So building strategies to focus and like pull yourself away from those technologies and things like that is essential. Sometimes, however, even if we're not distracted, we still just don't send off the right vibes. Like maybe we leave a conversation seeming more self-centered than we intended, or seeming not very considerate of the things the other person was saying. Even something as simple as asking someone to like repeat what they just said. You're like, hey, could you say that again? I didn't hear it. That can rub people the wrong way sometimes. So we're trying to avoid those kinds of situations. This can all be accidental, so it's worth building habits that make it happen less. One thing we may be doing and not realizing it is spending time forming judgments and evaluations while the other person is speaking. These kinds of interpretations can be useful for sure, but time and a place. It's often not something you should be doing immediately, like during the conversation or while the other person is speaking even, because it can hamper your ability to actively listen, to listen well.
All right, so Brandon, you touched on a lot of really good stuff here. Stuff that I think really cuts to the heart of the matter. Because what we do here, like, we carry around these little distraction devices in our back pockets called smartphones all the time. And I should add, this hits me a little bit harder than it might some of you, because I'm in my 40s, and I remember a time when nobody had smartphones. And so leaving my phone behind is just standard, but I understand if it's not quite standard for everybody else. But the thing is, there's a lot of people out there who make an awful lot of money off of distracting you and getting your eyeballs on your phone rather than what's going on in the outside world. It is quite literally a billion and billion dollar industry, okay? But there are going to be times when it's critical for you to pay attention to another person to the exclusion of everything else. And it's not something we're always encouraged to do because distraction pays off in the moment, but intentionally giving your attention to another person pays off in the long term. And the best way to shut somebody down is to look at your phone mid-conversation. Doesn't feel good when it's done to you, and it's not a good thing to do to other people. And sometimes, as Brandon said, we don't always give off signals that we are listening. So it could be that we're paying a lot of attention, but the other person just doesn't know. And we don't always communicate effectively that we are. Does that cover? Do I understand what you were saying there, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We'll be talking even more detail in what kinds of things can distract you, what kind of signals you could accidentally be giving off, things like that later on. But I just wanted to point out with this slide that these things can happen accidentally, even if you're not trying.
Right. And we'll go more into that, as you say.
Perfect. I'm going to go on to the next slide. I believe this is yours if you'd like to take control.
I will grab control here. So, what happens if we are not actively listening when we need to? Okay. So, let me outline a scenario for you. Let's say you and a coworker have certain tasks that your boss has assigned to you, and you have a conversation about who's going to handle what tasks, okay? Both of you leave the conversation thinking that you know what you need to do and you've agreed on what you need to do. But what can happen is you accidentally talk right past each other and you didn't actually agree on what needed to be done. So now at the end of your shift, your boss is saying, hey, there are some tasks that didn't get done. What happened? And both of you point at each other and you both say, that other person was supposed to be doing it. So now your boss is mad at you, you're mad at each other, your relationship and trust have been reduced, and nobody's happy. You want to try to avoid that. So you want to make sure that when you have a conversation, especially if it's work related or something urgent, that you understand what needs to happen, because you don't want to leave that conversation until you know. You also need to make sure the other person knows what they need to do. Because if they leave the conversation thinking they understand, but they don't, you got the same problem. And later on, when your boss asks you about it, you need to be able to agree on what conversation took place. Because if neither one of you understand what conversation actually took place, then your boss is just going to think you're trying to implicate each other and that you're slacking off, when really you came into it with the best of intentions and you really thought you knew what was going on and you were trying to do right by your work. Now, this can happen to you in school all the time. Ask anybody who's been to college and done group work. They'll have plenty of scenarios where you met with the group, divided up the work for the group project, and then the due date comes up and somebody ain't done what they're supposed to do. You don't want to be in that situation. And you want to make sure that you confirm ahead of time that everybody knows exactly what has to happen. What can happen sometimes in that situation is that person who didn't do the work may not have understood what they were supposed to do and didn't want to be the one to bring it up. Sometimes insecurity can get in the way of getting the work done. And maybe they don't have sufficient trust in you listening to their concerns yet. And you want to bring across that you do want to help them, that you are in this together, and if they have concerns, that you're willing to listen to them. But if you don't take the time to actively listen and build up that trust, they're going to be afraid to bring up the fact that maybe they don't quite know what's up.
Yeah, I think that it seems like what's happening is that active listening, not active listening, can have some pretty serious consequences, like academically, professionally, personally.
Absolutely right, Brandon. And this bears repeating. I want to emphasize that people can come into the group projects like this with the best intentions. They want the group project to succeed, but other people maybe sometimes need help from you. And you have to not passively give that help, but actively give that help. And so I want to draw a contrast between hearing versus listening, okay? By default, we tend to do a lot more passive hearing than we do active listening. And the reason for that is because active listening does take effort. We have to expend our attention and our energy to listen actively. If we sit there and just take in words, that's not sufficient to be an active listener. We all know how to hear, but we don't necessarily all know how to listen. And even if we come in wanting to spend effort, it's easy for our effort to slip, even if we don't mean for that to happen. Okay. So, as Brandon said earlier, sometimes our attention can drift. Sometimes our phones are intentionally distracting us. Also, I think Brandon touched on the fact that judging something rather than being willing to take in information also doesn't take that much effort. It is very easy to rush to judgment rather than waiting and taking in more information from other people. We have to be willing to suspend our judgment in the name of being better listeners, because judgment is a path of low resistance and distraction is a path of low resistance. Listening and analyzing and asking the right questions and being willing to pause before you pass judgment are going to be hard. But in the long term, it's going to pay dividends. So I want to just say that passive hearing is involuntary, doesn't take a lot of effort, and it can happen even if we don't mean it to. Active listening is a process, and we have to focus on that process, and we need to make sure that we follow the process to make sure that we get the best outcomes in the conversation and build trust with other people.
Yeah. So the distinction here is important, it seems, because hearing doesn't provide a whole lot of benefit by itself. It's really easy to do. Listening is where the value is actually at, and can get us information, can help us relate to other people, that kind of thing.
You're absolutely right. I mean, hearing is part of the process, but there's a lot more that comes with it. So let's continue onward, and I believe at this point I pass back to you here.
Yeah, I'll take that over real quick. Here we are. All right, so now I want to get into a detail about what kind of things you can actually do. So, for instance, on this slide, I wanted to talk about how the first goal. What kind of things can you do to support that first goal? How do you get more information from the speaker? However, before I give my own little list, I think our intuitions on this can be really strong. Like, I think we can be really good at getting information. I think we're really good at it because, like I mentioned, you're in college. You've been listening for at least 18 years now, usually, right? So I think we can be pretty good at it already. So I wanted to ask all of you, what sort of techniques have you employed to help yourself get information better? You can feel free to use chat, or you can also turn your mic on and respond verbally. It's all up to you.
And it's okay.
Eye contact.
Eye contact. I gotcha. Ask questions. I like that, Yolanda. That way you can understand things better. Yeah.
Body language.
Mm-hmm. Overriding selective hearing. Right. You're like forcing yourself to hear everything.
Repeating what they say.
That's a good one. I like keep that one in mind. You're going to hear that one again. Repeating the questions back. I like it. Anirudh, I noticed you had your hand raised. Interactive questions, like follow-up questions. Perfect. Yes, I like it.
I must say, you folks are definitely you're practically doing the presentation for us.
That's right.
These are all things that we've thought of. Like I feel like Vanna White revealing the letters on Wheel of Fortune right now.
In fact, let's take a look. Let's see what the things I have down, and just give yourself a pat on the back as I do it. Because like I mentioned, I think our intuitions are really strong about this. It's just important to say these things explicitly, to actually like say them so that other people, so that we can have them written down and that we know them. That way we can think about them when we get to it. Let's take a look. So, firstly, we want to avoid distractions. We mentioned this one earlier. That doesn't just mean the phone thing. That's important, of course, but also you can get distracted just by like seeing other people in the background. So maybe you want to face yourself away from other people, or maybe there's just too many people in the area you're talking. So you go to like a coffee shop, or you go on a walk or something like that to picking a quieter place to talk, basically. When it's appropriate, it may be a good idea to take notes when the other person is talking. Obviously, if you're like having a difficult conversation with your significant other, pulling up a pencil and paper might be a bit weird. But if you're talking with like your boss, or you're having office hours with your instructor, that would be a good time to take notes. Your instructors will likely think that's a good thing, in fact. As a tutor, I am contractually obligated to remind you that taking notes can help both understanding a concept and remembering its details. So it can help you quite a lot.
And I want to give 10 points to Ashley for saying writing things down and note taking before we got to it.
Yep, that's right.
Those
saying you're gonna see all these.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm
no,
not
you're
actively
good.
listening. Please excuse me.
You're good. So, I think talking online also makes things a little more difficult in terms of timing. Just sort of a tangent real quick, but like when you're talking online, latency can make things a little bit more difficult. So there's a little more wiggle room there. When you don't quite understand something, you can ask about it, which I believe we saw a few times in chat. It's great to see. This can help with understanding, of course, but also with our second goal. It can help. Make the speaker feel listened to. Just demonstrating your understanding in a way that also furthers it can help everyone. Clamaris, I noticed you asked what subject I tutor. I also tutor math, actually. So
we're both math teachers.
Yeah, both math teachers. But I think it's fun. So like me some math. In a group of 3 or more, it's also important to make sure that you're only actively listening to one person at a time. Like if you're trying to listen to 2 people at once, you're trying to listen with one person with one ear and the other person with another. That's not very helpful. It's going to be more useful to tell the other person, "Can you give me 1 second? I wanted to hear what they're saying," and listen to one person with both ears.
Right. And these are all things that you folks mentioned. So pretty much all of you nail it. And I think it bears repeating a point that Brandon said, was that we all have a good idea of how to do this properly. We may not be doing all of the things properly all at once, though.
Right, that's right. Yeah, like listing these out and like thinking about how you can do them can make them easier to repeat when you're actually in the middle of a conversation with someone.
And I think Crystal actually brought up an excellent point here. I'm going to give you a thumbs up as well. Understanding that everybody processes and relays information differently. This is absolutely something that Brandon and I have both had to learn as tutors. Like the way we present to one student is absolutely not the way we present to another student. And it's on us, especially as instructors, to actively listen, check for understanding, restate what the person is asking to make sure we're answering the right question.
Right. Because sometimes we don't understand. Like our listening up to that point has not been corresponding to what the person is saying quite well. So taking that extra step and like thinking like, okay, did I really understand all that correctly? Can help a lot.
And just to put this another way, sometimes what words mean to one person is not the same thing as what a word means to another person. So if there's any doubt upon what a definition means, the active listening process will help us get some clarity around that if you feel like that's been happening.
That's right. Let's move forward here. So let's cover the other half of active listening now. I think we've mentioned some of the techniques that might help the speaker feel listened to in the last slide and also in chat. I noticed that students said something like eye contact, things like let's see, just actually scroll things right up here. Yeah, so I remember hearing eye contact. I remember hearing things about, we talked about asking questions. That's another thing that can help speakers feel actively listened to. It can also help when you repeat things, like it was mentioned earlier. When you repeat the question back, or you repeat what the person said, it can help them feel listened to, because then they know that you heard what they said. So let's actually list some of those. So one method that's worked for me is restating what they said. We heard that earlier. This demonstrates very directly that you were listening, but also it can help you understand better if they can confirm or correct, hopefully, the understanding. While the speaker is talking, try to use body language. That was another one I heard. A body language appropriate for the situation. This one seems obvious, but there's always room for improvement. Focus on what they're saying and how they're feeling about it. Frequent eye contact can really show that you're listening. So that one's that's one to focus on. It can take practice for some people, though. In addition to body language reactions, there are also verbal ones. This can be like a chuckle when someone says something funny, or like a little "aw" when they describe something sentimental, or a quick like "I'm sorry" when they say something unfortunate happened to them. Notice that among all these techniques, none of them derail the conversation. None of them derail the conversation. They're still speaking. You're still listening. All right. Now that we have some of these like assorted techniques, kind of in a nebulous cloud, over the last 2 slides, I've given you a bunch of random techniques. I want to let Phil organize them into a list and like say when you can do them and how you can do them. So I'll pass it on over.
All right, that's legit. I will need 1 moment. I believe something's gone wrong with my settings, so I'm gonna have to leave the meeting for 30 seconds and pop back in just to make sure that my microphone is gonna work properly here, okay?
Sure.
I'm getting some error messages on my side. So just 1 moment.
While Phil is getting that fixed, Phil is going to talk about a lot of the order of the active listening technique, the active listening process. You can see the 4 steps here. What he's going to focus on is is priority, making sure that you observe first, and then you analyze, and then you restate, and then you ask questions. I noticed Silas in chat says, don't feel bad about asking questions, because if you don't understand, that will most likely lead to worse problems. That's exactly right. It'll lead to worse problems, not only in like a material sense, like, I didn't really understand when they said something in class, and now I don't know how to do the work. But also it can hurt in an interpersonal sense, like, oh, they weren't really listening to me. They didn't really understand it all that well. That sucks, like that kind of thing. I like the phrasing of not being afraid to ask questions, because when I'm in a conversation with someone, if I'm describing something kind of weird and complicated, I think asking questions makes me feel more listened to, which seems kind of counterintuitive. Like if someone asks a question, it's not like they're not listening. In fact, when someone asks a question, it demonstrates a lack of understanding. So it seems like they weren't listening, but really it makes you feel more listened to.
All right. Am I coming through okay now?
Oh, you're a little loud right there for a second.
Okay. Mike, is this okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, yeah. So I think I know what was going on. For some reason, my settings on my microphone were turned way down.
Oh, interesting.
It took me a while to figure out why that was happening.
I gotcha.
So I'm not too loud at this point, am I?
Nope, you're perfect.
All right, excellent. So now that we've gotten that straightened out, I think my boss actually sent me something saying that I was coming through too quietly, and it took me a moment to figure out like why that was happening. All right.
Gotcha.
So
let me go ahead and take control whenever you're ready, Phil.
Yes. I'm on it. Okay. So as Brandon was saying, my thing is that I want to try to set this into a stepwise process, okay? And the reason for this is because Brandon and I actually come from different educational backgrounds. His background is in pure mathematics and mine's in chemistry. And the thing about chemists is that we tend to organize things into methods, whereas mathematicians tend to operate in the realm of the theoretical quite a bit. So his approach to this was all about talking about general ideas, and mine is more about action steps. All right, so let me go through these steps and what they mean, all right? So number 1, always observe first. Before you try to analyze what the other person's words mean, you need to hit pause for a bit, stop, just listen, just watch. Don't try to digest what they're saying immediately, okay? If you try to analyze the meaning of something before you're done listening and before you're done watching, then what you're doing is not quite active listening. Okay. So we oftentimes are tempted to analyze fast and come to a judgment fast and know what something means before we've really gotten finished listening to the other person. So we need to learn to disentangle our analysis and our judgment and our digestion of what was said from actually listening. Now, after we observe, we take a moment, we pause, and we think about what we just heard and think about what we just watched, all right? Now, you don't want to restate too early either, because if we restate before we analyze, all we're doing is repeating the other person's words back to them. Sometimes this can help the other person feel listened to, but maybe we haven't gleaned all the meaning we can from what the other person says, and we might risk missing something by accident. We may not always check for agreement on what the words mean. Now, so observe, analyze, restate, ask. Think about that in your head. Observe, analyze, restate, ask. Observe, analyze, restate, ask. Now, be careful about asking too early before. We want to make sure that we restate what we understood before we jump in and ask a question. Because if you ask before you restate, you may end up asking something that derails the other person from the point they were trying to make. And if you've missed their point, it's better to confirm what their point was before you ask. All right. Does that sound okay to you, Brandon?
Yeah, sounds great. I'll try not to interrupt too much because I don't want to push us too far over time. So
That's right. Yeah.
From now on, I'll let you keep going.
I'm with you there. All right. So first step, observing. All right. At this point, we are going to concentrate on just taking in information, and we're not going to do anything else. Now, as I said earlier, we all will come into a situation with our own opinions. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But if we're going to be really good active listeners, we have to be willing to, at least for a moment, suspend whatever opinion and suspend whatever judgment we're coming into the situation with in favor of being willing to take in new information from this other person. Okay? Now, whatever opinion we might have, we suspend it because we have to be willing to change our mind about what we think is going on in the face of whatever information that person wants to tell us. Okay? If you come in with a fixed mindset, that's going to prevent you from being a good active listener. We can just say to ourselves, like, all right, I do have an opinion, but just for now, I'm going to pay attention to this other person. I'm going to engage with this other person. I'm going to listen to the words that they say, and I'm going to watch them closely. Now, your opinion when you come in could be right, but recognize the possibility that it might not be, and there is no shame in changing your mind in the face of new information. Right? Now, of course, when you observe, that doesn't just mean the words that person says. As some of you mentioned before, we are listening for tone in the way they say them. Because if you hear an edge in their tone, they might be frustrated or angry about what's going on. Their voice could sound a little bit shaky, or they might sound a little bit rushed, and they might be nervous. So the feeling behind the words that are being said may come through also. And if you pay attention to that, that's also important information. So we're listening not only to the words they're saying, but the words they're communicating, either through their tone or, as somebody mentioned earlier, through nonverbal gestures at this point. If we're distracted, as somebody said earlier, we're not taking in all the information. And it's worth mentioning that we may not even realize how distracting they are. How distracted we are, I mean to say. Now, always be willing to revise your opinion and try not to get distracted by your phones or ordinary outside noises, and try to selectively hear and watch the other person. Being stuck in your head at this point is going to be the hardest thing to do, and it's going to take effort, but it is going to be the most critical step. All right. So, Brandon, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think we're good so far. I'm hoping that these next two, this slide and the next slide, help answer Gianna's question about what the difference between observing and analyzing is.
That's
I like
right.
that question. So it's this could help highlight that.
Indeed.
Excuse me.
That's absolutely right. And she also adds that rather than proving or disproving your opinion, I think it's better to be willing to learn instead. You've basically hit the nail on the head right there when you said that. That's what the entire active listening process is all about. Being willing to take in information and letting the other person know that you're doing that. All right. So once we've observed, the analysis step is where we hit pause for a second and we think about what was just said. All right. A lot of us tend to skip this step or try to rush through it. Okay. So what's a first good practice is that if you're not entirely sure what was said, or you just need a moment to make sure you understood, and you need a moment to maybe think about it and place the other person's words, translate them into your own words, you can say, hold on a second. Let me think about that. That communicates to the other person that you're not just waiting for your turn to talk, that you are actually thinking about what was said. Okay? Now, you don't want to repeat what was just said back to them in step 3. You want to stop here at step 2. So if someone had a lot to say, you can take a moment, try to summarize what was said, and maybe reduce it to 1 or 2 sentences in your own words, because later on in step 3, we are going to say what we understood back with our paraphrase and ensure that we do have agreement. But just for this moment, we're not going to respond immediately. We're going to paraphrase in our own head first. Now, we're not just going to think about the words, though. We're going to think about everything we observed. Not just the words the other person said, but the way they said them and the nonverbal gestures they might have made. Maybe if someone looks a little bit jittery or seems a little bit distracted, they may be nervous or afraid or have something going on that you can ask about later. You don't have to ask about it right now because asking is actually step 4. But for a moment, think about how you might paraphrase that as well. Now, if what you just heard didn't entirely make sense, that's okay. That's also something you can ask about later. But for now, here in step 2, we're just going to pause, think, and paraphrase the parts that we did understand. Now, we will have the temptation sometimes to ask immediately, but I would say that to be the best possible active listener, you don't want to ask immediately. You want to at least take a moment and understand the parts that you can before you jump to your own questions. Now, when you analyze, you're going to notice sometimes judgments come up. You may, after just listening, think that you know what's going on, but it's probably better, if you want to be the best possible active listener, to reserve your judgments just for a little bit. Again, it's fine to have an opinion, but you want to be prepared to ask those questions before you make any assumptions. All right. Now, again, I just want to emphasize this because it does bear repeating. You have to be willing to admit that you may not have the complete picture, even if you understood what was just said. So we want to make sure we take a moment and stop before we rush to judgment. All right. I am mindful of the time, so I am going to move on. Is that okay, Brandon?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So once you've hit pause, take a moment to analyze what was being said, making sure that you can paraphrase the parts that you did understand. Now, in step 3, we say what we did understand back to the other person and check for confirmation. Okay? So we are going to repeat our paraphrase, not the exact words, but our own paraphrase back to the speaker, and we are going to listen for confirmation. And then let them confirm whether you understood or not. Now, if you didn't understand everything, that's okay. We're going to ask about the parts we didn't understand later. Because repeating a paraphrase and really taking the time to paraphrase it is going to let them know that you were actively listening and you were not passively hearing. Okay? Now, if the other person disagrees with your paraphrase, that's okay. This is going to happen sometimes, but you have to be willing to now repeat the process, go back to step 1, and start observing again, okay? Remember, observe, analyze, restate, ask. Okay? If your restatement didn't go right, you can accept that. In fact, it's not your fault entirely if you didn't understand completely. We just have to have patience. We have to be willing to go back if we need to. Also, when you restate, you can also state things you observed, like an edge in someone's tone. You can say like, oh, I noticed you seem to be speaking faster. Are you feeling nervous? You can restate the things that you noticed. And in step 4, we ask about them. I'm going to hit pause for a second to have a look at the chat here. It says, thinking before saying something is important. Sometimes we come to conclusions or judgments too quickly. You are absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm going to give you 100 points for that. All right. So after we have restated our paraphrase, we're going to check for agreement that makes sure the person agrees with our paraphrase. Now, if you feel like there are parts that you missed when you were analyzing or when you were restating, it's okay to ask at this point. But you want to, again, I say restate first because we want to make sure that there is at least something we agree on before we start asking questions. Okay. If you did misunderstand any part of it, or you feel a little bit hazy, or you feel like maybe your judgments are jumping in to try to fill in the blanks, it's better to ask for clarification. I do think a number of you have already mentioned this in the chat, but be specific about what you're asking about. You want to ask something like if you notice a judgment popping up, it's a good idea to ask, well, would it be correct to say blank? Rather than just assuming that what you're thinking is correct. If you have a judgment or an opinion, ask the other person if it's true. And if the other person disagrees with it, that's okay. But you could ask something like, well, could you help me understand this situation better? Okay, we're down to about 2 minutes left, so we may have to skip a few of these slides. I'm very sorry about this, Brandon. You were right on time, and I was dragging this thing. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
All right. So I just want to cover this slide really quick before we jump to the end. So there are conversational pitfalls that even people who mean to listen might do on accident, okay? When you ask questions, it's easy to ask questions that are very general and not very specific, and that can induce ambiguity into a conversation. Like one statement you don't want to use is, does that make sense? Because you might even not agree on what doesn't or does make sense, and the other person may feel pressured into just saying, yes, that makes sense, even if it doesn't. Another conversational pitfall is when you're trying to relate to another person, you might get caught up in your own story and stop actively listening in favor of telling your own story. How many people do you know that have jumped into a conversation say, hey, that reminds me of a story about this time when such and such and such? That's not active listening. That's critical listening. Critical listening is okay, but this presentation is really more about active listening. People who don't want other people to be worried or have negative emotion might jump in and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't worry about that. Maybe you should just do this instead. At best, that feels a little bit dismissive, and at worst, that feels a little bit rude. It's better to just stop, suspend your judgment, tell yourself, like, if you need to make a judgment, you don't have to make it during the conversation, you can make it afterwards. The time for active listening is time for observing the other person. You're free to make up your mind later, maybe even later that day, maybe tomorrow, maybe even next month. You don't have to make up your mind about what it all means right now. What's most important in the moment is just listening to the other person. All right. I am actually going to hop past all the other slides because we are out of time.
All right. So we're very happy to have the opportunity to talk about this topic with you all. Phil and I are tutors at the Wake Tech ILC, which is Wake Tech's tutoring service. It's free for students, free at the point of service. We offer tons of options for in-person, online, one-on-one, group sessions, and all sorts of subjects, all that kind of stuff. So we hope that if you have any questions throughout the semester, we can help you out. As a closing note, we wanted to thank you all for coming. We hope that this is not only just like useful generally, but that you can take away from this something really specific. You're like, next time when I'm listening to someone on one-on-one, I'm going to try to do this more often, that kind of thing. Maybe you'll think about those steps that Phil mentioned, that kind of thing. So I hope that this is useful to you all. And otherwise, I hope that the rest of your your student success conference is a good one.
Yeah, Brandon has 100% covered it. I hope you keep what you've learned here in your back pocket, because if you practice it, it's going to make all of your work and school relationships that much more effective. Remember, observe, analyze, restate, ask. Observe, analyze, restate, ask. Remember that. Keep it in order. And I hope all of you take this with you, and I hope you learned something today.
I see all the thank yous in chat. I'm glad that this is helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were all here, and I hope the rest of the conference is every bit as good as what we did.